I am Vietnamese. Okay.
I'm half Korean and half Filipino.
So I'm ethnically Chinese.
I'm Filipino.
And I was born in Vietnam, the central part of Vietnam, and my family moved here when I was 10.
I was born here in Washington.
Oh, sorry, I meant like I'm born here in Washington.
I was born here in Washington.
Just, the family concept of, the Asian way, right? Like you learn from your elders, you show respect to them, and you just take care of each other.
It's really nice to have those ties, to have that sense of identity and familiarity and belonging to somewhere. And then more specific things are just kind of like food and traditions among my family.
I cherish a lot of things like our food and our language, especially like when our language is written down, it looks like art and it's just super pretty. And then one thing that I especially cherish about my Korean side is our pop culture. Like Korea is known for their K-dramas and
I think a lot of it would just be the importance of family, and that even if we're not blood related, it's like not important. It's just like how close you are with people, it's what family's all about.
Hi, everyone. We are here today representing Jackson's Student Advocacy Committee and our project on Asian American Pacific Islander hate. I'm Yunsel, a junior.
And I'm Catherine, a sophomore, and we are both from Jackson. Our committee aims to act as a voice for Jackson's underrepresented students and educate our school community on important social issues. Today's topic being Asian American Pacific Islander hate.
Before we begin, we want to warn you of trigger warnings often involving racial slurs, racial violence and discrimination, etc.
These next few slides are stories from our very own students at Jackson. Please take this moment to read each story and understand the feelings and thoughts behind each one.
Example I can give you is, during lunchtime, right? My mom is a great cook, and I would bring my whatever it is that she will cook for the day for lunch. And then when I open up my little Tupperware, you see other people reacting to it. Like, ooh, what does that smell? It smells great to me, right? But it's not the same for everybody. And that was when I really felt like conscious.
yeah, actually, I used to be part of this one sports team where the girls would just make tons of racist jokes about like my skin color or like the language that people would speak. And, I wasn't having any of it. So I was
Remarks that I've gotten throughout my life, things like the fox eye trend, or people would say things like, Chinatown is that way when I'm like walking on the street, saying things like ni hao to me, assuming that I don't speak English when I don't even speak Mandarin either. Or a lot of unintentionally discriminating remarks, kind of like, what are you, in reference to my ethnicity, which is pretty like dehumanizing. And I've had a lot of experiences where people wouldn't be able to tell me apart from my Asian peers, which I also don't think was on purpose, but is also pretty discriminatory.
A lot of them, they aren't really, I wouldn't say there would be very major. I feel like a lot of it would just be like a lot of like name calling and just like slanting like of the eyes, and like just more recently would be like coronavirus. Like uh like targeting like and like just calling me like anti-Chinese like slurs, even though I'm Filipino.
So yeah, when being conscious, it's just a really weird feeling to where you have to worry about your every move, your actions, because you worry what other people are thinking about you.
Wishing that I wasn't ethnically Chinese because I felt like I was tired of all of those remarks and those assumptions.
Yeah, it did actually. Like, I felt like I shouldn't speak my native language, or I shouldn't do these things that made me who I am racially in front of these people.
I would say yeah. There's always like this stereotype of just like, Asians are smart and like you're just like, like we're just smart, that's it. And I feel like just like with hesitation and like, joining clubs and everything and just like having that in the back of my mind of like, people are gonna judge you because you're just gonna be like another Asian that's going into like Model UN or something. And it has made me uncomfortable. And growing up, I had a lot of internalized racism, and that the only way and the only significance of my race towards like white people, and just like other races in general too, I feel like would be just making jokes about myself, like just like we have racial jokes about my own race instead of like being proud of it.
As COVID-19 cases increase, so does the hate for people of Asian descent. As you can see on this slide, there are many different Asian countries with many different cultures. Understand that China is not the only Asian country. There is a variety of Asian American Pacific Islander students associated with diverse cultures. Just because a person has black hair and looks Asian does not mean you can assume that they are Chinese. These judgments on our looks are one of the main reasons for the recent racial attacks. This video compiles some of the violent Asian American hate crimes that have taken place in the United States. Please take note of the trigger warning.
Celebrations are marking the Lunar New Year, the year of the ox, and that includes fireworks. Artists in China threw molten iron against a wall to create these effects. The pandemic, though, has again put a damper on most festivities. And in this country, what should be a celebratory time coincides with a disturbing surge of racist attacks against Asian Americans. Here's CBS's Nancy Chen.
This surveillance footage shows a 71-year-old Asian grandmother violently shoved to the ground, her purse stolen. Just one of several attacks in California's Bay Area recently. A 91-year-old man pushed in Oakland's Chinatown, one of 3 attacks that day. 84-year-old Thai American Visha Ratanapakdi knocked over while out for a walk. He died a few days later from his injuries. His family saying they believe it was rooted in racism.
This guy should not be allowed back on the street. He should be charged with murder. If you see the video, there's nothing non-intentional about it.
Asian American leaders say these attacks are a trend, not isolated incidents.
What we are seeing is just the tip of the iceberg of what is actually happening in the communities.
John Yang is the president of Asian Americans Advancing Justice and blames, in part, anti-Asian rhetoric surrounding the pandemic.
The Asian American community has been faced with effectively 2 pandemics. The first is the COVID-19 pandemic, but the second pandemic that we have faced is also a virus. It's a virus of racism that we have faced.
Asian Americans Advancing Justice has cited at least 3,000 anti-Asian incidents since last February. In New York City, there was an 867% increase in Asian hate crime victims in 2020 compared to the year before. NYPD has created a hate crimes task force.
Hello.
And police in Oakland's Chinatown are stepping up patrols to reassure business owners and families.
We wanted our business owners and our community to know that we care, that we're concerned, and that we're going to do everything we can to keep this community safe.
Nancy Chen, CBS News, New York.
In this video, you might have noticed many of the victims of Asian American Pacific Islander hate crimes are elders. This is an especially painful occurrence to see in Asian cultures as we cherish, respect, love, and protect our elders. Our elders give us life, Our elders show us how to live. Our elders put their lives on the line to better our lives. Our elders do whatever they can to make us happy. Our elders show us how to care. Our elders show us how to love. What the grandchildren and children want is to make sure they are safe and reciprocate the love they are given.
People will watch footage from news outlets and also see the Asian American Pacific Islander community mourn for their lost ones, especially for our elders, and still deny that there is a connection between the hate crimes and race. Well, let's look at the facts. There has been a research 149% increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans from 2019 to 2020 when the pandemic influenced xenophobic concepts of China virus and Kung flu. In total, there have been over 3,800 hateful incidents towards the Asian American Pacific Islander community during the first year of the pandemic. Most of the victims, women. In larger US cities where the Asian American population thrives, these hate crimes have seen the greatest increases. The Asian American Pacific Islander community is tired of false racial accusations and finger points. We are tired of being blamed for the pandemic. We are not the coronavirus.
American community.
It's kind of scary to think, like myself being a grown adult male where I'm pretty confident in my abilities to handle a lot of situation. Yet, there's this thought in the back of my mind, and it's kind of scary to be out and about. And for me, it's not like I'm worried, but I'm more worried about like my families and especially the elderly, right? We see a lot of these stories where people just randomly getting attacked, and it definitely raises that concern. And I work in a school, and I think about our young people. How are they feeling? What are we as adults? What are we doing as a school to help our young, especially Asian students, to feel safe? And it's scary to think that it is 2021, yet we're afraid to be out in public or afraid to be just going places because we have to worry about other people and how they might treat us.
Yeah, it's really terrifying. My grandma, she lives alone in California in the LA area. And there's a lot of crimes going on there as well as the San Francisco, Oakland area. So it's really scary. I get really nervous because I never know if she's okay. And same thing with my mom. My mom spends a lot of time in Seattle. She works there. And I'm not even sure if she's like safe or not at all times because, you could be walking on the street and something could happen to you these days. Like you never really know. And so it's just really scary, all of the rise of hate and hate crimes.
Well, ever since the pandemic started, I noticed a ton of Asian hate starting, especially when our former president referred to the coronavirus as like the Chinese virus or Kung flu. So ever since then, I've seen and experienced a lot more Asian hate, and it's getting way more violent now, especially since the hate crimes are targeting our elder communities. It makes me terrified for my grandparents. Like I don't want them leaving their house alone, especially because they're old, they're fragile, and they're vulnerable to assaults. And not to mention, they can barely speak English. So how are they supposed to communicate with someone that only speaks English? Like or I can't even imagine what it'd be like for them to have to call the police or call to get help.
Community.
Well, of course, I would say that I'm disappointed and that I am pretty scared just because of how violent it's like, a lot of it has gotten. But I would say that I'm not surprised because even then, just like a couple years back, and especially like in the early 2000s, where like, like Asians and racism, just like racism like with Asians just like wasn't a thing. Like we would just like roll with the punches and just like, brush it off. And so I think the fact that we have just like, it hasn't really, kept up in like conversation like with racism and everything, like, as like a really serious thing up until like, recently, that it's like I'm not really surprised because nobody's ever talked about it until now.
Asian American.
I think, the first thing that comes to mind is like Asian people are good at math, right? And I always joke with people like, I might be good at math, but if you copy from me, you might get the wrong answer. And really, like, I wasn't good at math. And so I have a lot of people, especially growing up in school, people always ask me like, oh, how do you do this? Or like, can you help me? It's like, no, I can't even help myself. So that will be the first thing that comes to mind.
So there's the whole model minority type of stereotype, and that, Asians are expected to be smart, good at math, play piano, really accomplished. And people will assume that because I'm Asian, I'm really good at something, which a lot of times isn't true.
The big one that I face is that all Asians are smart, or like they're supposed to be good at math, and it's impacted me all my school experience. Like there would be kids who'd ask me all the answers to everything, or they'd try to cheat off me because I'm Asian. I'm supposed to be smart, but in reality, I am struggling with things. Like I'm not a robot who knows everything, and it's difficult because people will assume that I am some genius when in reality I'm not. I get confused with things, and it really made me feel conflicted with my racial identity because it made me feel like I had to fit this type of standard that I have to be smart in order for me to be
like, being Asian and being smart. Just like I would say I do pretty well in school, and like another thing just being just like really hesitant with a lot of stuff, again, just trying to not be like this stereotype of like an Asian person, but I fit like a lot of it because that's just who I am. But it's not because I'm Asian, it's just because it's the way I like, am. So I guess just more with that, just like a lot of hesitancy, just like with trying not to, be conforming with the stereotype, and that it's made me miss out on some like opportunities that would probably be beneficial for me in the future, but because I just didn't want to seem like that stereotype, that it would like, just not make it good.
Spread of such false accusations builds the perspective that it's all right to discriminate against our community. A main form of discrimination is also seen in stereotypes. A particular stereotype that has arisen in TikTok trends and makeup industry is the fox eye trend. You may think, but this trend has nothing to do with Asian culture. Growing up as an Asian American Pacific Islander, we're often ridiculed for our small eyes. People would come up to us and pull their eyes in a way of making fun of us. This mocking action makes the Asian American Pacific Islander extremely uncomfortable, as we're made fun of for something we cannot control. And to turn this mocking action into a trend is a showcase of hypocrisy. Another stereotype Asian American Pacific Islanders encounter is that all Asians are good at math. Now you may think, isn't this a compliment? It may look like a compliment to you, but it's a standard that many people find difficulty to live up to. Just because we look Asian does not mean that we have math genetics.
The stereotypes that Catherine and some of our interviewees previously mentioned are just a few of the many we face. One important concept based on stereotypes is the model minority myth, the perception that Asian Americans are generally excelling model students and strive for successful lives in America. While it may seem a positive myth, this misconception causes racial division amongst people of color. It also painfully ignores the realities of systematic racism faced by Asian Americans and completely disregards Asians who face generational poverty, mental health issues, and lack of healthcare. Though we uplift the successful people in our community, the majority of Asian Americans still struggle to reach the creative perception of the American dream.
I think, you know, having open communication, conversation about race, and getting people to see the perspectives, right? You know, when you don't know something, you might say like things that might be offensive. But having conversation and having students get together and learn about each other, learn, you know, I think beyond race, learn about how to be good people. What is it? What does it mean to be a good person? We need to reteach that.
Definitely, administrators and staff members need to call out racism if they even suspect that they might have heard it, whether that's between students, between a teacher and a student, between fellow teachers. Whenever they think they might have heard something, they need to confront that, get to the bottom of it, and address it.
I think Jackson could put on their social media or write a simple email saying that they stand with the Asian community. Like that could be a start to making us feel more comfortable. And another thing they could do is they could add anti-racism to their anti-bullying assemblies. Like I don't think I've been to an anti-bullying assembly where they've discussed racism. And especially now that it's getting called out and everyone's becoming more aware of racist remarks and racist things, I think adding anti-racism to anti-bullying assemblies would really help the community feel more safe.
Everyone.
Well, I mean, of course it would be just like not only just to like reduce and also take racial, like, you know, bullying, harassment just like seriously, but I think a lot of it would just be trying to be more inclusive, like, you know, bringing up more like famous like Asian figures that, and like from all around Asia, not just, you know, from East Asia, and not just, and like of course people who have like, you know, a great amount of knowledge, but also just like actors and just people like who are Asian and like just are famous and have been well known for their great accomplishments.
Once again, you know, making it relatable, because if you're not me and you've never been in my shoe, you don't know how I feel and what I've experienced. And we all have a story. I think it's fair to say that all of us have experienced some form. And so how can we learn from each other? And once again, it's all about being a good person. Like, can we just treat people with the respect that we all want and deserve? And so by educating that and just kind of emphasis on, hey, let's be good people, I think that will be the biggest mindset and shift in terms of how we interact with one another.
First, I would like to let them know that this isn't a Black Lives Matter versus Stop Asian Hate type of thing. Like, we're not trying to discredit anyone's experience with racism. And I want them to know that racism against Asians has been normalized for so long that now we're just starting to realize how normalized it is. And I want them to know that, or I want them to reflect and think about any Asian jokes they've made, and they should realize how those jokes are racist. And then for us Asians, or me personally, I don't think most people will support us until it's popular to support us. Like,
Before we end, we want to acknowledge that there are many other topics regarding hate towards our community that we have not addressed today. This includes microaggression, racial fetishization, and hypersexualism in our Asian American Pacific Islander community. When you say to your Asian friend, "Oh, you got 100% on the test," that's because you're Asian. What you think is just a joke or is unharmful is an example of microaggression. You may have not noticed the harm, but this is because jokes regarding Asian American have been normalized for years.
Second, people fetishizing a race is just not it. Society labeling Asian women as exotic and dragon ladies, targeting them to fulfill sexual desires, this objectification and hypersexualization needs to stop. Fetishization is not a compliment. It is dehumanizing and the reason why conditions of aggression and violence are created towards Asian American Pacific Islander women. The Atlanta shooting with 6 out of 8 victims identified as Asian women, that's no coincidence. That wasn't the result of a bad day. While we wrap up, please know these are 2 great, easy to understand sources that can help build your knowledge on the 2 topics that we briefly discussed just now.
This slide also contains information on many other sources that you may want to take time to look through. One of the best ways to defeat the virus, not COVID-19, but hate against Asian American Pacific Islander community, is to educate yourself and take action. Your teacher will leave these links in the chat. The first link will lead you to a project done by Leah Shin, a Jackson alumni, and it shares the story of Asian American Pacific Islander influencers and their impacts and stories. The next links are a couple of websites and organizations that you could consider donating to. Finally, some websites to take action by signing petitions or reporting hate crimes.
If you would like to participate in conversations on what we discussed today, share your own stories, or give/get support from other Jackson students, please join us for a Zoom meeting that will be held during lunch from 11:45 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. This link should be shared in the chat by your teacher, or you can ask them directly. Note that the purpose of the Zoom is to give you guys a space to interact with other students casually and get the support you need. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing some of you guys soon.